Welcome back to the Infinite Jungle. On today's show, I have Galen Moore, Global Communications Lead at Interop Labs, a development team working on Axelar, a Web3 interoperability protocol, aka bridging. Galen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Christine. Great to be here.
Fun fact for listeners who may not know, Galen and I have worked together in the past. He used to be my boss at Coindesk.
Ancient history. So long ago.
I know. Time really, time moves differently in crypto, and it does feel like over a decade ago. But here we are again. I'm very excited to talk with you about Axelar and learn more about how bridging, how interoperability works between blockchains. So,
Yeah.
first and foremost, for our listeners and for me, primarily for me. Can you explain how exactly Axelar, the core bridging protocol of Axelar works? I know Axelar has many different interoperability projects and products, but how does, at its core, Axelar function?
Sure. Simply put, Axelar is a blockchain that connects blockchains. So there is a dynamic validator set running proof of stake. Messages are picked up by that validator set on a source chain, verified, and then passed to a destination chain. So those messages might include, most people think of bridging. It might include a message to verify that a deposit has taken place on a source chain and authorize issuance of a wrapped asset in an equivalent amount on a destination chain. So this is, the way, for example, USDC often travels between chains, and that can happen either with sort of a lock and mint type of approach where the asset is locked on the source chain in a smart contract and then minted on the destination chain, or it can happen in a burn and mint kind of approach where the asset is actually burned and destroyed on the destination chain and an equivalent amount is minted. Sorry, burned and
And
destroyed on
which
the source chain and an equivalent amount is minted on the destination chain.
and
Yeah.
which
So
version is Axelar?
so
The
Axelar is in the
burn in the
middle.
mint or the lock in the mint? Oh,
Oh,
in the middle.
Axelar powers both. Yeah,
Oh,
100%. There are applications using both approaches on Axelar. I guess so. Then to sort of think of that as like the most basic and familiar use of a cross chain or interoperability protocol. On top of that, uh, interoperability networks like Axelar provide the ability to pass arbitrary messages as well. So you might have heard the phrase arbitrary messaging network or arbitrary messaging protocol. We use the term general message passing. What that means is that when you bridge that asset, or when you verify that that asset is locked in a contract on a source chain, you can also send along with that some instructions. So you could say, issue a wrapped asset in this amount and swap it for this other asset on this DEX, and then send back the asset to the address that initiated the transaction. So in that case, instead of getting a wrapped asset, right, you're sort of moving an asset cross chain, initiating a swap, and then getting the result of that swap, the token that you swapped for.
I have some questions though. So can anybody on Axelar create and make the validators of Axelar basically confirm, like, I want to be able to move this asset from Ethereum to Solana,
Mhm.
and I want it to be a burn and mint style, and I want to have these rules around it. Is Axelar like a permissionless protocol that can support that kind of programmatic behavior between chains? What if the validators are not running like Ethereum and Solana
Mm.
nodes? Like, how does Axelar allow for the cross messaging in a permissionless way?
Okay. All right. Let me just take that one piece at a time. So first of all, let's just think of two arbitrary chains. Can any application developer come in and apply any kind of logic that they want? Maybe it's a swap, like, they're sort of doing a cross-chain swap and automating each of the steps of that, right? Converting gas tokens on the back end so that the user doesn't have to
Yes.
like go acquire the gas token of whatever chain. Maybe it's game logic. Maybe you want a game that involves Ethereum NFTs, but you don't want to run the game logic on Ethereum because it's too expensive. You want to run the game logic on Polygon, or a cheaper chain. So in that case, very similar, right? You can sort of apply any combination of chains and logic as you might desire. You might be another gaming example. You might be using NFT issued on one chain as an access token for a game or even for a DeFi application. We have application level projects in the ecosystem that are doing KYC tokens for institutional finance, for example, to participate in DeFi. You get your KYC token on one chain, and then you don't have to like do that on five different chains. You can use that to gain admission to DeFi services on multiple chains now that the system knows who you are, type of thing. So just examples of use cases, but yes, you can apply sort of any kind of logic. Now the second part of the question, as I read it, is how do you sort of connect different chains? How do you connect new chains? That currently XLR connects 64 different blockchains, all
Wow.
Cosmos and EVM blockchains. We have just rolled out to DevNet a product called Interchain Amplifier, which makes it easy and permissionless to connect new blockchains. Basically, you can think of it like in the past, if you wanted to connect a new blockchain, a new form of consensus like Solana to the Axelar network, you would have to be a protocol developer. You would have to do that at the protocol layer. What Interchain Amplifier does is it enables smart contract developers to instantiate those connections and set up a connection to any form of consensus, really. So, in the first cohort that are working with Interchain Amplifier on DevNet, just announced this week, we have Stacks, the Bitcoin L2. We have Hedera, which is a directed acyclic graph. It's not even a blockchain. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Hedera's out there. I actually really love this stuff. So we have Stacks, Hedera. We have a project called Ironfish that's doing a proof of work zero knowledge. It's got its own proof of work consensus algorithm, its own miners. Right? How cool is this? And it's doing like a zero knowledge, like it's like a privacy as a service type of chain. You can route your transaction through Ironfish, and it um, you know keeps the details of the transaction hidden.
Wow, you're really
Uh,
getting out there with some of these chains that
totally,
Axelar
totally.
is
I mean, well, that's the
for
example, right? It's like
supporting.
you can take any kind of like weird ass consensus algorithm and plug it into Axelar, and so then your question, like, how did the val? Oh, and the other one, by the way, is Moonriver, which is a Polkadot ecosystem chain. So that's another
I've never
another
heard of
alternative
these.
form of
Moon
consensus.
River,
Yeah.
Ironfish.
Moon River, no,
Anyways,
Moon River's legit. They're on Kusama, which is like Polkadot's, kind of experimental wing.
yeah, it's testnet,
Yeah, yeah, testnet, exactly.
but it has
And
tokens that are worth that
right,
money.
it kind of has its own
It's
ecosystem.
strange.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yes,
mean,
it's weird.
yeah, it's a wild world.
Anyways,
It's an unlimited jungle.
but
The
yes, exactly. It's
the
an
but but
an
so how
implement.
do you then spin up validators? So let's say you want to connect, brand new chain nobody's ever heard of. How do you set up validators who will monitor events on that chain, right, and transmit them to the network? How do you incentivize them? Up until now, the 64 chains, right? Especially IBC chains is a whole other category, right? Cosmos chains, right? It's all connected. You don't have to worry about this stuff. But when it comes to externally verified chains like EVM chains, yeah, you got to run a node and it costs money. So, in, up until now, the Axelar protocol incentivizes the addition of new chains with additional rewards, inflationary rewards. The rate of inflation has been reduced to accommodate this kind of expansive growth in chains without huge growth in inflation of AXL, the staking token. Uh, but there's a limit to that, and we do envision a world with thousands of blockchains. I think which is not, I think, that far fetched these days when you look at Celestia, Eigenlayer, and other projects that are in the modular ecosystem, right? Um, so how do you connect thousands of new blockchains? In addition, let's not forget like institutional clients, customers that want to have their own private chain. Um, etc. Layer threes on top of layer two ecosystems in Ethereum. How do you connect those blockchains without diluting the hell out of AXL? And the answer is well, at least with Interchain Amplifier, you get your group of validators. They and you incentivize them with a pool of AXL to start, and sort of bootstrap the validator pool and incentives there with a with a pool of AXL to reward them. And in addition to that, you can go from there by, you know, I think some networks would probably be able to incentivize validators with fees alone, right? If you have some protocols that are connecting would be able to do that. If not, need to take other paths. But bottom line, I think the set of existing validators needs to approve a new connection. There needs to be an on-chain vote. But some of the economics of that, how that works, is spelled out in the interchain amplifier path.
So the validator set of Axelar is not homogeneous in that they're not all running all of the nodes. They're divided into these
Ah,
groups
yeah,
that you
good
can
question.
rent out. And as a user, um, uh, I suppose that as a user of Axelar trying to bridge assets over or trying to pass different messages around, as a user, you may just use like the communication channels or like the bridges that are already set up, but as like a protocol or maybe somebody with a larger treasury or like more money basically,
Mhm.
you buy Axelar, create a pool of Axelar that you can incentivize validators and kind
Mhm.
of get them
That's
to
correct.
go on board.
Yeah.
Is this how this is
Yeah, that's
working?
right. And I mean, if you look at Axelar's validator set, it is the largest of any cross-chain network. 75 validators currently active in the set. Um, they we do not require each validator to cover all chains, but we do incentivize validators for covering additional chains. Um, so it creates some interesting economics when you think about, like, okay, the biggest validators, right, are going to be and we have some of the biggest validating on Axelar, names you would certainly recognize. And by the way, all of this is visible at axelarscan.io, is our block explorer. The validators page there has details on all the validators in the active set. Um, but you could certainly envision a kind of a problem that Ethereum itself is facing now, I think, with concentration of stake, right, where you have the validators that are able to connect the most chains with the most resources. They can connect the most chains. They're getting the greatest rewards. They're able to offer the best returns to stakers. So they're going to, there's sort of a winner take all type of dynamic there. That's something that I think folks in the Axelar ecosystem have been aware of for a long time, which is why quadratic voting was implemented last year. So on Axelar, each validator, and I think Ethereum nerds out there will love this, each validator has a vote, which is the square root of its stake. So if you have 1 unit of stake, you have 1 vote. If you have, if you want to have 2 votes, you need 4 units of stake. If you want to have 3 votes, you need 9 units of stake, and so on. So in that way, it creates a much higher threshold for any kind of like concentration of voting power that could lead to a sort of a scenario of possible collusion
But how
among
do
the
you
validators.
know that a validator is not owned by the same node operator? Like, how would you make that civil resistant?
Yeah. So I think one of the reasons why this works is because it's not proof of stake like Axelar uses, but it's delegated proof of stake. I use the word proof of stake as an umbrella term. People are very familiar with it. Within proof of stake, there are different flavors, and what Axelar employs is it's Tendermint consensus. It's a delegated proof of stake. So the validators are, for the most part, known entities that are operating not just on Axelar, but are operating validators on multiple proof of stake chains. So, there's an element of reputational guarantee, right? And sort of knowledge about what the entity is. Uh, it's not one entity that you're trusting, it's a distributed group of entities, but there is an element of, it's dissimilar to Ethereum, where yes, you might have a sort of a, anybody could be running the validator, right? If I understand it correctly. In this case,
Yeah.
there's a sort of a, whether the validator is sort of doxed or not, there's a kind of an on-chain identifiable entity that's running something here, and with some reputation and presumably some revenue at risk.
Yes, yes. I think that on Ethereum, there's quite a big push to try and make sure that it's not only known entities that are validating on Ethereum, entities, individuals,
Right.
and solo stakers to encourage like the censorship resistance and
Right.
permissionlessness of Ethereum. However, that really is not it's not really working out for for Ethereum right now. There's lots of problems with that. One other question that I wanted to ask about how Axelar works before we get into just broader topics on the future of interoperability protocols is you said that we incentivize these validators to run more, obviously run more,
Mm.
secure more chains. And presumably that means changing, of course, like you said, issuance and monetary policy
Hmm.
and finagling with these kinds of incentives. Who is we here? Obviously,
Yeah.
Interop Labs is a development team. Curious to know, is there some kind of a DAO or some kind of a foundation? How do those decisions get made? Who
Yeah,
makes
they're
those decisions?
good. Very good question. So we, in that sense, is a pretty colloquial use of we. I think you could say we is the Axelar ecosystem. All of the parameters that we've been talking about are subject to on-chain vote. So there is the Axelar Foundation does exist, and Axelar Foundation, does delegate stake. So does have some as time goes on, right? And AXL is, AXL supply is further and further distributed, and these distribution tokenomics are detailed in a an early blog post by the foundation. Um, as AXL gets distributed, that concentration of stake with the foundation decreases. So I
Mm,
think decentralization is a path. The way that we think about it in Interrupt Labs is that we've built technology that enables decentralization. We've built technology, and we've we've continued to improve it in ways that ensure that the network continues to move toward decentralization. And I think this is
right.
very similar to the kind of calculus you'd apply in Ethereum, where you'd want to not say, well, is Ethereum perfectly decentralized today? Debatable. What you really
Definitely
want
not.
is what you really want to be debating is it moving toward decentralization, or is it moving the other way? Right? Is stake decentralizing? Is it becoming more distributed and diverse, or is it centralizing, becoming more concentrated and homogenous? Because
But
we know that in these security models, concentration and homogeneity of stake is a very bad signal.
to be clear, though, Ethereum Foundation, with the balance of ETH that it had, which back during the ICO days when Ethereum first launched was very large,
Right.
they don't stake. Ethereum Foundation, I don't believe, stakes a large percentage of ETH.
Hmm.
To be clear, does the Axelar Foundation stake the
Delegates
token?
delegates
Okay,
stake
and so
to
it does.
validators. Yeah.
I see, and it does
Yeah.
then get yield from that staking.
Hmm. Yeah, I believe so.
Oh, okay,
I'm not
all
I'm
right.
not I'm not privy to the books, but I believe
But
that's accurate.
as you can see, that's a little bit of a concern. Like if you have a large balance of a
Hmm.
staking token that you stake, you will presumably just earn more stake
Hmm.
as your as you stake, and so that could get a little fishy. It could get a little concerning. But
Well,
I mean, I understand that maybe
yeah.
you unstake and then you put it back into the ecosystem. There's I hear you though.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
a work
there
in
is
progress.
a sort of like a roadmap, if you will, for
Yes.
distributing stake, right, to where it's no longer in the hands of the foundation. I think certainly, as you said, right, early days, you sort of have that concentration of stake. Those questions are very legitimate. I think what the answer that we can provide to those questions is it's all on chain, baby. Go, you can see, and hold us to account. Like honestly, hold us, hold the network to account. And that's that doesn't answer all questions, but I think at least is the beginning of an answer. I would hope, at least the beginning of a solution to a problem that we certainly take seriously at Interrupt Labs and at Axelar Foundation when it comes to pursuing that decentralized security model.
Yeah, and decentralization really is a spectrum. It's not like a black and white. You are decentralized or you are not.
That's
It's
true,
very
but
much
it's
relative.
also like, can it be decentralized, right?
Hmm.
Are you
Is
becoming more
there?
decentralized? I think those are the right questions to ask. And I would say there are protocols across the board that that haven't really put those pieces in place, sadly.
Fair. That's fair. There's actually quite a few in this space. However, I will say on the topic of decentralization and on the topic of kind of moving towards that future, I see inherent limits, Galen, of how decentralized interoperability protocols can be if you don't have some kind of standard SDK kit that allows that creates kind of like a blueprint for how your protocol should be built. So Cosmos is a great example where I see interoperability working at scale. And obviously blockchains like Polkadot and other kind of more maybe even Avalanche, but blockchains that kind of look at the vision of multiple chains, but all within an ecosystem
Mm,
of standardized protocol development. I can see how interoperability works. But when it comes to Ethereum and when it comes to other modularity blockchains that really only define one layer of the modular blockchain stack, I feel like the interoperability between all those layers can get quite out of hand quite quickly. And the only type of interoperability protocol that will really facilitate communication across them all is something like an exchange, like a centralized solution where you can look at these different types of technologies being built and then create custom solutions based off of that. What are your thoughts on like the future of what interoperability looks like when this space is just the technology in the space is changing so rapidly and we're not operating under a centralized system of like here's the
yeah.
standard for making blockchains communicate with each other. There is no
Mm.
standard. And in that sense, like how does an Axelar look at the future of how this all plays out?
Yeah, great stuff. I mean, like first of all, let me just say that I think that centralized exchanges have come up with some of the greatest innovations in this space. I'm not a total DeFi maxi who hates on all centralized exchanges. You've got to look at BitMEX, for example, right? And the perp swap itself is just kind of a cool, innovative, crazy product, but also a derivatives exchange that offers 100x margin and lets randos interact directly with the order book and doesn't, except for maybe once or twice, break, right? Like that's incredible. It is an incredible financial innovation, right? Like everyone in Chicago should be taking notes. And and definitely everyone in London should be taking notes, like a
Pop
lot.
off, Galen. Pop off.
Right? Right? But but that said, I mean, like, why are we here? I think I'm a bit of a Bitcoiner. I think you notice. And it's
Yes, I
frustrating
know.
that, like, if I want to do something with my Bitcoin, like, what are my options? Like, how am I going to deposit my Bitcoin and earn, or take out a loan, for example, or earn some
The
interest?
Babylon chain.
Yeah, yeah, there are options, right? It's starting to happen, but like for a long time, I wanted to do anything. I'm going through, whatever. I'm going through WBTC, centralized service. I'm going through
Right.
Coinbase, a centralized service. And I think, at least for me, those services are, probably fine, but don't think that's really why we're here. I would like to be doing that in a way where I can see those transactions end to end, right? I don't have to rely on the word of frankly, a venture backed startup, right? I'm putting my money in with a venture backed startup and I'm getting what yield? That doesn't make any sense to me now. Okay, Coinbase is a public company. Fine, fine, fine. But honestly, I want to, if I'm gonna deposit my precious BTC or my precious ETH or my precious AXL anywhere, I want it to be in a protocol where I can see it end to end and it's open. And if something goes wrong or it's bad, it can be forked. Right. All of those principles are super important. So I think you're right. It's like, to an extent, like, why are centralized exchanges the on ramp? Right. Well, okay. Everybody says, okay, bad UX. Right. It's true, right? They have better UX, but it's also because I can come in with whatever asset and go out on whatever asset I want, right? I can do a cross chain swap easy. Cross chain swaps, cross chain interoperability is not a problem. You just put a database in the middle, right? AWS works great. It's fantastic, right? We can do
A
this.
lot of
But
validators use it.
right. Even, yeah, that's right. But even, like, do we want to be able to do that in a way where we can, have the whole transaction on chain end to end, right, over decentralized infrastructure? I think a lot of people do, and use cases for that kind of transaction have emerged. Um, so that's where Axelar, I think, fits in. Now you described that world of like modular blockchains, like hundreds of blockchains or whatever. Look, I mean, I think any sort of modular blockchain or L2 that launches will have what two things, right? It will have a sequencer, and it will have B a bridge, right? But if so far that's like worked pretty well. Okay, go over here, bridge. We built the bridge. It's good, right? It's fine. Go over there to the bridge, the L2 bridge that we built. Bridge your tokens over, bridge your ETH over, and play, have fun, right? That's been the model. If you're talking about something where you've got like 10 different blockchains that are supposed to be the components of the infrastructure behind an application, I'm sorry, that just doesn't work, right? You need the ability to pass logic across those blockchains. Not only that, you need to be able to kind of abstract the not you need to not only abstract it for the user, where like stuff is automated for the user, like for example gas conversions or whatever. Steps that are being taken, like you can't have the user pushing the button for each of those steps, right? You need to sort of, the user pushes a button and those things happen, right? But it needs to be like that for the developer too, right? The developer has to be able to the developer can't like program on 10 different blockchains, right? The user facing developer. And the best analogy, like actually Sriram from Eigenlayer said this in a podcast with Sergey, one of the co-founders of Axelock Protocol. uh he was on the block with Frank, and he was saying like, look, SaaS, right? Shopify, for example. Like you take Shopify and integrate e-commerce into your website. Shopify has like 10 different SaaS products built into it, like rolled into it. You don't know what those are, right? The user building the end user facing developer building an e-commerce website, integrating Shopify does not have any idea what the SaaS doesn't need to know what the SaaS services are that are embedded in there. So that's, I think, the next level of interoperability where we can actually connect hundreds of blockchains in a way that's meaningful not only for users but for developers, right? Where that's like possible.
Okay, let's talk about that next level. And this will be my final question about this whole bridging future that you've described. Because I too, yes, I would like to have it be a permissionless link. Do I think it's possible? I think it's a little bit TBD, but I see, especially in the beginning of the episode, when you talked about the new feature of being able to more easily onboard chains, like that's something Axelar saw. Axelar, the teams of developers saw that, look, it's not sustainable for these chains to have to be voted in all the time.
Right, it's
We
not
have to
scalable.
create this. It's not scalable. So we
Yeah,
got to build this. So when you're looking at the future right now, even in the near term future, with the taking off of things like restaking protocols, of even sequencing being something that happens on a shared sequencing layer, a shared sequencer,
yeah.
the development of these types of products, what are some of the additional or new products and technologies that Axelar or you think bridges in general need looking forward? Because it doesn't seem like interoperability is something that's really going to be possible in the context of this. Clearly there's a lot of changes that are coming on
Yeah,
to what rollups look like, what execution layers are going to look like. Shared sequencing is one of them. Restaking is another big
totally.
one, and that's going to impact bridges. So like, how do you guys adapt and evolve? Is there anything kind of in the horizon that you
hmm
guys are looking at that will make Axelar like a long-term sustainable interoperability solution?
Yeah, great question. I think the biggest thing right now for us is the Axelar virtual machine, which it just went to mainnet a short while ago, just a few weeks ago. We haven't, done a big hoopla about it, but we've communicated a fair amount about what this thing is and what it's supposed to do, and it is the sort of programmable layer that underlies products like Interchain Amplifier that we were just discussing, giving Axelar the ability to automate developer tasks. For example, like you've got something you've done on one chain, you want to duplicate it on 5 other chains. This is not trivial, right? Building that, I mean, we've seen projects go down this route, right? The largest projects have built what I would call sort of a multi-chain approach, right? They've built instantiations of their application. Like these are the projects with the most resources, instantiations of their application, of their protocol on multiple blockchains. It's extremely uh, labor intensive. It's very high developer overhead, and in the end, you do end up with a kind of a second tier experience on the secondary on the the expansion chains, if you will. If you could think of it like you run a coffee shop and you want to expand your coffee shop chain from your origin city to a dozen other cities and to another country. How are you going to make sure that the coffee tastes, that the user who comes from the original store and goes to the store in a new city is going to taste the same cup of coffee and have the same experience, right? How are you going to have that sort of like McDonald's, Starbucks consistency of your DApp across multiple blockchains? And the answer is not, well, you're going to hire a million protocol developers. No, that's not the answer for anybody. The answer is there's going to be infrastructure that will automate a lot of those tasks, automate the translation, automate the routing, um, and ultimately like automate the plugging in of security and verification. And so I think that Axelar virtual machine layer is something that's very exciting to us because going back to our conversation earlier, anybody can build an SDK that automates those things. But are you going to have those functions on chain or off? Are those functions that handle those interchain steps? Are they going to be smart contract logic on a blockchain that anybody can see, or are they going to be in a black box, or on a in a database that's outside of view and ultimately subject to censorship, uh, hacking, regulation, any of those bad, scary words. So I think, in terms of the roadmap of what's coming up, the products that I think will be built on top of Axelar Virtual Machine is what we're most excited about.
Very
Axelar Virtual Machine
interesting.
enables COSM WASM contracts on the Axelar interchain environment. So Interchain Amplifier is the first, Interchain Token Service is another one, and coming up, Interchain Maestro, which is a orchestrator
Hmm.
for applications, a kind of a Kubernetes for Web3. Those are, I think, the products that we're most excited about. So look, Christine, we're deep in the infrastructure layer. We're like super nerds. We don't talk to anybody but developers. Um,
Well,
but
thank you for
I'm
talking to
super
me,
glad you had us on the
Galen.
show.
Yes, thank you. And very quickly, is there a timeline for the AVM, the Axelar Virtual Machine?
Well,
Is
it
there
is
a
on mainnet
mainnet
now.
launch
It's on
date?
mainnet now. It is. We
Okay,
deployed it on mainnet with a recent version upgrade that was voted on
gotcha.
chain. Um, we don't we don't do a lot of fixed public timelines for reasons that I'm sure a lot of people can understand. But I think these are all things that we have in view for this year, and uh, we did publish in the first part of the year a kind of a roadmap look at like what's in view for the ecosystem and what projects are working on, and I think there's a lot of exciting announcements to come, but definitely that roadmap is a good guide to kind of some of these things we've been talking about, and where you can find more details about that as well.
All right, we'll link to that in the show notes, and we'll also link to the Axelar Twitter page, where I'm sure a lot of the updates will come. I gotta say, if you're listening to this podcast and you are interested in crypto, but you're not on Twitter, you're missing out. Gotta get on Twitter,
What about
sort of.
Farcaster? I'm like more interested in Farcaster these days. I'm like, wow.
No, stop it. I'm
Oh,
no,
like, my job is
absolutely
hard
not.
enough. Stop it.
Absolutely not. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you, Galen. Thank you again for coming
Likewise.
on to the show.
Likewise,
And thank
Christine.
you,
Thank you.
everybody, for listening to the another episode of Infinite Jungle. We hope you have learned something new about Ethereum, and we hope you'll join again for the next episode of Infinite Jungle. Until next time, stay safe out there, everybody.